Okay, it's Tuesday, March 26, 2024, 7:36. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. The first item on the agenda, as always, is public comment. Does anyone in the public would like to make a comment? Okay. You can either, maybe after, if you just write your name there. If you,
I already did.
Perfect.
So I'm
Thank
good
you
to
very
go.
much.
Okay, Carrie Vomaka, 14 Harbor Road, speaking as an individual homeowner. I would like to talk about the town's assets. By far, our biggest asset is our schools and the reputation for said schools that drives the desirability of our town. What is it that makes our schools great? One, our teachers. The majority of the Board of Ed's proposed budget increase is being put toward ensuring we are competitively compensating our teachers. That's good. You should support that, as retaining talent is critical. But it's not enough. There are great teachers in all the surrounding districts. Let's actually think then about why someone would pay a premium to live in this town for the schools. One, classroom size. Yes, we have a policy on this, but there is no doubt in my mind that an individual child's experience will be impacted by this factor significantly. The proposed budget keeps in line with DPS's policy on class size without straining it. Two, differentiation. Allowing for multiple math levels, for example, as early as elementary school, supporting language choices, offering a wonderful choice of electives. The proposed budget supports our district's ability to differentiate. Three, music and the arts. This is an essential differentiator, and it's not just the teaching time, but also the prep, scheduling, and time teachers can spend after class with students that matter. Darien invests in these areas. If you require cuts from the currently proposed budget, these areas are at risk. Gifted and special education, number 4. Again, our district does a lot to support the learners on either side of the bell curve. This is not the case in all districts, and people move here because they know that their child, whether they fall in the middle of the curve or on either end, will get what they need. A further cut to the budget doesn't threaten the average child, but cuts to the current budget threaten each individual child in this district. People looking to move here will not be thinking in averages. They don't care if we meet policy, but will ask if this town will advance their individual child's education. And they will look at things like class size, whether or not there are sufficient aides, whether they feel their kids' lives are being enriched through the arts, music, language, and physical education, and whether or not there are teachers with enough bandwidth in their days to make time for their specific child's needs. If people think that this district is going to start cutting corners, they will not move here. Our real estate values will decline, and we will face even more financial pressure in future budget cycles. Please do the right thing. I'd love to see how much each of us is being asked to pay as part of this process. If it costs me an extra $100 or $200 a year to do so, I think that's well worth the cost. It's certainly better than the $50,000 a year in private school tuition or a 1% drop in property values. There is nothing in this Board of Ed budget that is fiscally irresponsible. It already reflects cuts that many people in this town worry will impact programming. It is in line with our comparable districts, lower in some cases, and reflects the reality of educating our children in a post-pandemic, inflation-ridden world. Please do the fiscally responsible thing and pass this budget as is. Do not jeopardize our town's greatest asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Move on to the next item. So this is one of our 4 upcoming sort of budget workshops here. You know, this part of it is all dedicated to what's about a third of the town budget. The first item on our agenda to talk about is community and environment.
Okay. Community environment. Total budget in community environment is $145,000, up $11,000 or 8.6% over fiscal '24. This budget includes contractual services of $35,000, celebrations and grants of $107,000, and the harbor master budget at $3,000. So the total budget was up 11,000. 10,000 of that increase was to restore funding of the Holiday Light Program, which, based on a previous gift, was zeroed out last year. So that's essentially the entire increase in the budget. Just as a note, funded grants include the depot at 57,000, which is a modest increase year over year. The Museum of Darien at $20,000, which was flat year over year. And Kids in Crisis at 5,000, which was flat year over year. My only question on this budget was actually the decision not to fund 150 flagpoles and flags on Post Road at $5,000. This was proposed by the department but cut by the town administrator. Those flags hadn't been on Post Road prior to 17, I'm advised by the town administrator, but as the residents, I think, funded the gift in 17 and they were there from 17 until they were recently removed because they were tattered and worn. So as $5,000, I'd like to consider maybe funding that and replacing those flagpoles in lieu of a gift. If we can find a gift, that'd be great, but if not, I think we might want to consider that. The only other thing that was removed from this budget that I wanted to discuss is there's a patch of grass next to the Darien Fire Department across from Mansfield Avenue. It's kind of right in front of the Mechanic Street parking lot. There's a sign in front of it generally that talks about the farmer's market. It's not in great shape. There's some landscaping there. There's a couple of park benches. There's some pavers. I'm not sure anybody uses that. I'm not sure why we have it set up the way it's set up. So that's a Board of Selectmen matter, but if we're going to have this park or this little patch of grass, we ought to maintain it, but I'm not sure what purpose it's serving, and maybe we ought to repurpose that little bit of our downtown. It's very central, and if you're walking down the Post Road, it's noticeable. So that's another $5,000. There's no revenue or capital associated with this budget. That's all I've got on community environment.
And that's incremental to maintain that?
That's $5,000 that the town administrator cut to, from the operating budget to maintain that, yes. So that 5 and the 5 for the flags and flagpoles were a potential add.
Right, just, we weren't currently spending $5,000 to maintain it. Beautification requested $5,000
Right.
to clean it up a bit.
Clean it up a bit. So I would beg the Board of Selectmen to consider whether we should clean it up or whether we should remove the benches and just landscape the whole thing and maybe decrease the need to maintain it on an annual basis. I have no idea whether people use those benches or not. I would guess not.
Is that considered, is that fall, Jen, maybe you could check if that falls under Public Works or under Parks and Rec in terms of who actually?
So it's, one of the suggestions was we could, it's the Mechanic Street parking. So the Department of Transportation, do they own some of that property?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can
Yeah, it's
squeeze any.
not technically ours.
It's, right. So it's not a parks matter, it's not a town, it's kind of a tweener. Anything else? Any questions on the community environment budget? That's all I got. Next on the list is land use. I'll just keep going.
Yep.
Land use includes the planning and zoning and building control budgets. The planning and zoning budget is at $865,000, up $25,000 or 3% year over year. $21,000 of the $25,000 funds salary increases. Most of this is a contractual increase in salaries. There's a few going up, a few going down. Most of that increase is wage increases in salaries. All other changes in the planning and zoning budget are modest. Revenues are budgeted at $203,000, up $5K, representing an increase in application fees. And then finally, there's $60,000 of capital in this year's budget. The town's plan of conservation and development requires updating every 10 years and was last done in 2016. It's being proposed that we set aside money in each of 25, 26, and 27 to fund the $160,000 estimated to fund this renewed report, a new report on POCD report. So that's $60,000 this year. That's all really I had on the P&Z budget. On building control, that budget's $554,000, which is actually down $22,000 or 4%. 2 vacancies are being replaced with lower step personnel. So that's generating the decrease in the budget. Revenues being budgeted at $390,000, up 24%, which is virtually all building permit, budgeted increase in building permits. And there's no capital in this budget either. So both budgets that I've spoken of so far are pretty modest in the expense increase.
So I thought there was one item, unless this was moved to, wasn't there a $50,000 capital?
You know what, I think you're right. There's a, oh, no, yeah, that's the conservation development. That's a capital.
plan of okay, yeah,
That's the
yeah,
capital
okay.
item, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it at 60 and I saw it at 50, so I think it's on the 10-year plan at 60, but maybe it's in the budget at 50.
All right, let me double check.
Yeah, I think the budget,
Was 50.
yeah.
Yeah.
Jim, if I might add, just for everybody here, we've always accrued 3 years on the new plan, conservation, just so that everybody's aware of that. And the RTM P&Z committee did look at both of those budgets and already agreed with everything Dan said and approved on it.
That's it for land use.
So, I'm looking at their capital right now. They have the 50,000 for POCD, and then they did request 52,000 for a vehicle, but we have a solution for that, so that may be what you're thinking of, Jim.
Because that was removed, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And do we have an assumption on the revenue side of that?
What do you mean? The revenue? Yeah, revenue, so, you mean building permits?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're budgeted up 24% at $390,000 based on building permits.
And how much of that were the sort of larger projects versus?
About 500,000. So they have 1.5 for kind of base permit activity, and then 500,000 for the 2 projects.
General overhead.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. General overhead and miscellaneous.
You want to kick it up?
Sure. General overhead and miscellaneous, excuse my scratchy voice, include 3 components: employee benefits, risk management, and contingency. Included in employee benefits is medical insurance, which is slated to increase from 3.7 to 4.5 million, an alarming 21% increase over the prior year due to both inflation and adverse experience within the town's pool, risk pool. As has been discussed at both the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance levels, we recommend a town-wide study be done to attempt to identify possible coverage alternatives that might bring this under a little bit better control. Pension contributions will increase from 1.6 to 2.1 million, or 26%, an actuarially determined figure, mandated figure as a matter of fact, stemming from changes in both investment return and life expectancy assumptions, as well as a shift in the number of employees within the town's defined contribution plan. Interestingly enough, government employees live longer than the rest of us, so we have to provide for that longer life expectancy. Post-retiree medical contributions are increasing from $373,000 to $481,000, or 29%. I'm just full of good news tonight. This line item funds medical expenses incurred by retired police. As officers hired after 2006 are not eligible to participate, the number of officers in the program is declining. However, inflation and investment performance assumptions contribute to the line item's volatility. We were pleased to note that dental insurance, amounting to approximately $130,000 over the last 3 years, is sufficiently self-insured. The remaining components of benefits are both minor and very little from the past year. Peter?
Thank you. Yep, I covered we covered together, but I'm going to talk about risk management. It's showing a 4.35% increase this year, going up from 1.2 to 1.25 million. There was a robust discussion during the Board of Selectmen's review of this part of the budget, and I wholeheartedly agree with John Zagorowski and John Walcott that the town really should, take a fresh look at its business continuity plan to evaluate the adequacy of both our insurance coverage and other necessary plans to ensure the town can continue to operate without interruption no matter what. The contingency budget is pretty straightforward. We are requesting $175,000 for the Board of Finance, flat to last year, and the town is recommending a $260,000 set aside for salary increases, nearly flat to what it was last year. Any questions on that?
Just one question, John, on the OPEB. I mean, I looked at that. That was up significantly. I just want to make sure, Jen, that doesn't include the Board of Ed's
Correct.
contribution, right?
That
So
is
just remind
just us.
everybody, the town's pension plan, we actually covers town employees and non-teacher, non-administrator Board of Ed employees. So, when you look at their,
And the library.
yes, and when you look at their retirement, there's up 14% on the Board of Ed side, and their OPEB is up 21%. With Medicare up 8%. So it's just that continues to be, I think, year after year, one of the leading indicators, which is the cost of our pension contributions.
Anything else in general overhead? All right, so I'm gonna mark this into. We'll move on to human services. So there are several components in this budget. The Human Services Department, their budget is $299,000, up 18% from last year. Salary represents 92% of this budget. It's really significantly impacted by the salary study, both full-time and part-time. This department does handle blight issues and essential needs support for our community, an important role. The level of outside assistance is unchanged at $11,000, which continually shocks me that it's so low. But I guess there was ARPA funding available this year to supplement it, right, Jen? So, I hope everybody's getting what they need. I guess there was a request to combine 2 part-time folks to become a 1 full-time person, but our town administrator decided this wasn't the year to do that. There was a significant increase in cost if we did that, but ultimately it was discussed that it was potentially more efficient and in the long run might make sense. It just didn't make sense this year. They're doing a lot of work with, I guess, very little support, and so it's something to keep an eye on going forward. Questions about that? All right, Health Department, I'll keep going. $476,000 budget, up 17% from last year. Our head of the department is retiring, we're hiring a new sanitarian. this was the first full year that he was in the budget, so, or he, I don't know, he was in the budget, so the, salary expenses were up, but that was full-time, part-time did come down. Revenues, we were looking at that because in my own limited experience, I was thinking that the revenue should have gone up for hiring the sanitarian, but I didn't put two and two together that we brought the sanitarian on to do a lot of inspections that we don't charge for, so revenues actually were down. I guess also there was a restaurant reclassification that made less money. I didn't really totally understand the explanation, but it was like less money for the same inspection. So revenues were down. So the budget was up, but it's $476,000, and obviously there's a whole lot more establishments that need attention now. So I don't have any suggestions for changes in that budget,
Senior Center,
unless there's questions on that. Health Department, nothing. Cool.
Senior Center. Post-COVID, the Senior Center is fully open for business and introducing an increasingly active array of new programs designed to attract new members. Proposed expenses for fiscal '25 are $480,000, up 4.3% from fiscal '24. Reasons include an 8% increase in part-time salaries amounting to $11,000. However, other salaries, which are not being impacted by the town's compensation study, remain flat, as are FTEs, which remain at 7. Food expenses projected at $62,000 are up 22% due to inflation and the cost of tomatoes, as one might expect in a new backup vendor for chefs' absences. On the positive side, food revenue budget is at $38,000, up 26%. In answer to a question we had about membership and where it's going, it might appear that membership, being down more than 200 from the pre-COVID era, is declining. It is a non-resident component of that list. Once at 900, that once a $25 membership fee was assessed, revealed all the ghosts that were on that list. And it's since stabilized at 174. Interestingly enough, no complaints whatsoever have been voiced that the $25 might be too high. On the other hand, projected resident membership is expected to be just under 1,500 for fiscal '25. Average daily attendance has never been better and is up more than 50% since the pandemic to 120. Finally, the Senior Center is considering raising all paid fee classes to $5 per class to increase revenue, which is currently budgeted for $19,005. As a subcategory, senior transportation, the town is fully reimbursed for its annual $44,000 outlay by At Home in Darien. So the cost to the town is zero. Questions?
I will say I heard, as I caught like a conversation I didn't realize wasn't marked on the thing, about the At Home and Darien reimbursement and the conversation about insurance. It's a reasonable question. I guess it was brought up that, while we do get fully reimbursed for the cost of the transportation, that we are bearing the risk, right, Jen? So I'm not sure who it falls on to potentially revisit that or what implications that could have. I mean, I suppose if there was a claim and insurance costs went up, you could give them a bigger grant if it went the other way around. But did any further discussion happen beyond that, or how can we move forward with an evaluation of that decision?
Insurance is handled out of the town administrator's office, so I'm not sure what else has been done on that, but I can check with her and see if there's been any conversation on it or any movement on it.
It was Kate's desire to.
I thought this was discussed during the Board of Selectmen about, we are reimbursing them, but aren't they covered underneath our insurance policy?
They reimburse us for the drivers and for fuel. And they are covered under our workers' comp as well as under our lab for the vehicles. So that's where, like Taylor's saying, we're bearing the risk on those.
Ted, in the past when this was discussed, going back, and obviously you can confirm with Kate, but I believe that the problem was that if they had to go and get the insurance on their own, it was going to be too expensive, and therefore either the grant would be more or they would have to shut down. and that's why the town had absorbed taking the insurance in the past.
Let me check with Kate and get you an update on that.
Okay, thanks. Youth services is the final piece of the human services budget. It comes with revenues and expenses regarding summer camp. The revenues are $332,000, up 16% from last year. That is designed to cover the programming costs associated with the camp. The total expenses budget is $451,000, which is up almost 5% from last year. But the net cost of the town fell. Some of the expenses are up for, the typical inflationary influences on traveling out of town and the bus trips that they go on. Stuff like that. I guess seasonal wages are also increasing due to new minimum wage requirements. And the town is really only on the hook with youth services for the overhead or the personnel associated with running the department. So, as usual, pretty straightforward. Any questions?
Yeah, I just had one question. When we think about, like, Jen, has there ever been thought about, like, given that there's a lot of programming that takes place in here? Do we have excess surpluses that are ever coming into the budget that we should be thinking about maybe combining this or having some type of special revenue account for this?
No, I don't think we need to do that. This has a lot less volatility than Park and Rec, which was the main reason why we did the special revenue fund for Park and Rec. There's some volatility in her costs, but for the most part, it's mostly summer camp, which is a pretty manageable, predictable revenue and expense for her. So we don't have the wild swings like we did with Park and Rec programs.
I will say that you were going somewhere else with that. There was a good discussion when we met with our F&B partners around, and Jack, keep me honest, like the universe of services and programming that is provided to the youth of Darien through so many different sources, and how we could be potentially more efficient in capturing all of that and, kind of dividing and conquering, if that makes sense. Is that kind of what the point was? I'm not sure. Again, how we execute that.
I think part of it, which is the conversation, is that in many of these programs, even with the scholarships that they give, it's planned to be a break even. But throughout town, we don't necessarily allocate cost overhead of managing the department to various programs and that. So that's a cost accounting issue of whether or not that's important, but I believe if we recall, the programs are break even on at best on what they're doing and still providing a service. Is that those are the
Yeah, I was thinking, I thought we talked more about, we've got the depot doing a lot, we've got Parks and Rec doing a lot, we've got Youth Commission, there's also, then there's a community fund, like, there's a lot of, Thriving Youth, there's a whole lot of organizations.
Yes, this is the point of almost doing an inventory of all the different organizations, who's doing what, and making sure that we're not competing with each other. I like to use the term dueling banjos, and that it's an organized approach to this, so that everybody knows exactly what it's doing. It's almost an inventory of these services in total. The one I like to mention is that there's about 5 organizations that give bridge services in town. And you can go to the senior center, you go to DCA, you go to the library. At one time they were doing it, and so it's like, where is it best served, or do we all need to be doing it?
Thank you. I have nothing else to add. There are no questions. Who's up for general government?
Up for general government. The general government budget consists of 13 categories, including assessor, board of finance audit, board of selectmen, finance, HR, IT, legal, probate, registrar of voters, tax collector, town administrator, town clerk, and treasurer. 5 of these budgets are up very, very negligibly. Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Audit, Treasurer, Probate, and Registrar are up very negligibly in either dollar terms or both dollar and percentage terms, so I'm not really going to spend any time on those. So the other 8 I will spend time on. The assessor budget is $418,000, up $17,000 or 4%. Half that increase is salary increases. The balance is a 5% increase in support fees paid to Tyler, which is the firm we all got notices from on our reassessments. Revenues are projected up $78K or 7% due to increased taxes on state-owned land, and there's no capital in this budget. That's assessor budget. The finance department budget is $488,000, up 5% or $22,000. Full-time salaries are up $46,000 or 11%, due principally to the comp classification study that modified the salary ranges within this department and part-time returning to full-time. That is partially offset by bank fees declining $30,000. We didn't have $30,000 less bank fees, but they're now netted against investment income. So they're no longer reflected as an expense. Revenue for this department includes investment income, which we're not going to get into tonight. We'll cover that at a separate meeting, and there is no capital in this account.
Dan, in terms of the assessor's office,
Yep.
remind me, are we the same way that we're doing on the sort of plan of conservation and development? Are we also accruing for the 5-year?
The reval.
Okay.
The reval,
Is that
yes.
the 20, how much was that?
That's-
60,000 a year.
Double check. So I didn't see that in it. That would be a capital account.
Yep, it's under general government.
It's under,
Okay.
So in general government,
what do you mean general government?
we have a general government capital that includes town
Right.
administrator, assessor, IT, town clerk,
Okay.
registrar of voters.
I don't remember seeing a proposal on that one.
We don't put in a project request because it's just a standard 60,000 that we do every year.
Got it. Was there also, so I couldn't find, isn't the assessor using some new technology that requires some investment?
Yes.
Kind of a flyover?
Yep.
And I was looking for that, but I couldn't find it. So that's why I couldn't find the specific capital.
If that one's not a capital, that's in his operating.
That's in the operating.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Contractual service.
Next is the human resources budget, which is not the human services, this is HR. This budget's at $244,000, up $36,000 or 17%. Most of that is budgeted $25,000 to pay for a search firm to help fill the forthcoming town administrator vacancy. And there's $9,000 in salary increases in this budget. No revenue, no capital. The IT budget is $445,000, up just 2%, but there is a $37,000 capital item for desktop replacements based on a 3 to 4 year replacement cycle.
And those are computer desktops, right?
Computer desktops, yes. The budget for legal is $676,000, but that's down 7% or $50,000, and we're reducing one of the items based on, we're kind of right-sizing it back to historical expected workload. Remember, all of the Great Island-related legal fees are not in this budget. They're capitalized as part of the Great Island project. The tax collector budget is $327,000, up $21,000 or 17%, or 7%, excuse me. $19,000 of that is an 8% increase in salaries. That's a combination of wage increases and step jumps, including the addition of a second certified tax collector. Tax collector, we have revenues in this department. We'll discuss those separately later in our programming. And no capital with the tax collector budget. Two more. The town administrator budget is $411,000, up $17,000 or 5%, $8,000 increase in salaries, and a $16,000 increase in copier expenses as other related spending was consolidated in this line item. Jen, the one thing I couldn't find is where did the copier expenses go down so that this one could go up? Just something to maybe follow up on.
I'm going in there right now, let me just see if I remember
Okay.
very quickly.
There's also a $6,000 reduction in professional services. And then revenue is projected at 30,000, up 13,000, which is, we're getting more parking tickets. So we're projecting an additional $13,000 in parking ticket revenue, taking the total number to 30,000. And then the town clerk budget is 343,000, up just 1%, but revenue is forecast to fall 46,000 or 3%. This was, according to recent communication, we might be able to make up this $46,000 shortfall. So by the end of this budgeting cycle, maybe we project this revenue at flat, based on the correspondence I heard from you, right? There's also a $6,000 capital request in this budget for a key fob system to secure ballots and vital records, which seems to be a pretty smart thing to do. That's all I got. So,
I don't recall offhand, so let me look into the copy.
okay, thank you.
Just a couple comments on that. He did most of the work, but I reviewed it, and of the roughly $4 million among 13 accounts, it only went up about 12,000. So it's about 0.31%, and 3 of those line items went down. Another 2 were less than 1% increase, and 1 more was less than a 3% increase.
Got it. And, Dan, I know you said it looks like we may be making up some of our revenue shortfall. Jen, one of the things I was going to suggest on, as we're beginning to kind of formulate what type of surplus the town may have at the end of the year, if there are any surplus amounts, or accounts, I should say, that are material, I mean, we can pick a number. If the surplus is more than 5% of what's budgeted and over some dollar threshold, does it make sense to kind of relook at those in terms of what's being budgeted? To
Yeah,
see
I
if
think
they're-
so.
Because I think, listen, overall, just taking a step back, if we're looking at a overall tax increase to the average taxpayer of 7.5%, I think we need to be thinking about all of these various line items and seeing if there are any that may be over budgeted or.
I think it's a good exercise to do, but as we go through it, if we find that we are kind of tightening down within the departments, I think it would be wise, certainly not as a one-for-one, but to put a little bit more into contingency if we're going to squeeze on the department budgets a little bit.
And some of the feedback we've gotten during just the last week on the budget process preparing for tonight from Jen is that maybe some of the expense numbers maybe have been modified today versus where they were a month ago, and some of the revenue numbers maybe have been modified a little bit. So I think presumably we're tracking that, but you're tracking that. So there's a couple of items in Parks and Rec where I know, like paddle revenue or pickle revenue or something like that. The budget that came out of the Board of Selectmen might already have been modified if they had another look at it
Right.
today. So
On copiers?
there'll be some pluses and minuses to all of that.
On copiers, I did track it down. So we reduced within that same budget, professional services.
Right.
By $6,000, and that was because we moved the printer maintenance contract out of professional services, and it's
Okay.
now part of the copier lease.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions on general gov? Okay, Parks and Rec.
So John and I worked on this one. I'll start, and John, please jump in. Total Parks and Rec budget is $1.8 million, up $79,000 or 4.6%. There's 5 accounts that make up this budget. The first is admin, budgeted $573,000, up 9%, or $47,000. Most of that is a $40,000 increase in software and maintenance costs as they add a credit card processing service. Thank you, Jenny. And this, of course, begs the ongoing question. I know it's Mr. Martin's, one of his bugaboos is Sometimes we pass the fees on, sometimes we don't, but there's a cost to the town of accepting credit cards. We either make up for it in increasing the cost of the service that we allow to be paid for a credit card, or we tack on a processing fee. We're not going to solve that issue tonight, but there's a $40,000 increase in cost to handle credit cards within the Parks and Rec Department.
I'm sorry, I was making a note when you started talking about that. Can you explain the $40,000 increase to handle credit cards?
Software maintenance costs as they added a credit card processing service.
No, they
No.
have
Okay.
changed the way that they are paying for their registration system. ActiveNet, they changed it mid-year this year. We came to you and requested a budget transfer. They used to pay a per transaction fee, and that covered the software expense. And it was about, I want to say $60,000 or $70,000 a year doing it that way because they had such a huge volume of transactions. So Pam reached out to the vendor and they discussed just being invoiced an annual maintenance fee. And that's what this $40,000 is.
But it's an increase. Why is that an
Because
increase?
it was netted from the revenues before.
It was
So
netted from the revenue.
Right, so we'll see an increase in revenue and
Okay.
of, say, 70,000, but we have to take it on the expense side for
Okay.
40,000.
But it's net savings.
Yes.
Of 20.
Yep,
Up to
20 to 30, yeah.
That's what I remember too.
Okay, all right. Okay, beach and court expenses of $292,000 are down $15,000 or 5%. Principally based on a $24,000 reduction in security service expenses as we're discontinuing the monitor.
Correct.
Grounds, fields, and buildings budget of $340,000, which is, I said up 100, it must be up 18,000 or 6%. There's a couple of items in here. Facility repair and maintenance is up 9,000. Telecom is up 4,700, although it looks like maybe we can reduce that number to 3,000 based on kind of where we're tracking.
Yep.
Look, there was some double counting in some of the budgeting. Potable water is up 5,000, and then portable toilets are up 3,000 as we're adding a porta potty at McGuan. But it sounds also that maybe we can reduce that increase by 1,000. So I'm not really sure. On the potable water, I saw something about irrigation versus. So I'm still not sure why our water expenses. I mean, it's not that significant. It's $5,000, but it's a 21% increase. Is that just? Do you know whether that's just what we're paying?
So part of
water?
it is truing up against our actual from last year. I think that was about $2,000 of it. And then they are watering via irrigation up at Highland Farm, which I think is a relatively new
Okay.
ad up there.
All right. Organized recreation events budget is $76,000, is 3%, is down 3% year over year. Pretty nominally, $2,000 or so. Recreation facilities maintenance budget of $512,000 is up $31,000 or 6%. $31,000 of that increase is salaries based on new wage rates per recent negotiated union contract. $6,500 of that $31,000 is step, and the balance is wage increases. Parks and Rec revenue Parks and Rec revenue is projected at $948,000, down $59,000 or 6%. Beach and court fees are projected down $33,000 with beach stickers up 5, boat permits flat, paddle court fees down $15,000 as we return to pre-COVID usage, pickle court fees down $20,000. Last year was kind of the first year we projected pickle court revenue, and we projected too high, so this is kind of matching expected utilization, and then building rents are down $3,000. And then finally, organized recreation events are budgeted at $330,000, down $26,000 or 7%. 9,000 of that reduction was a mistake, so take the 26 and turn it into 17. Town hall rents are projected down $17,000 due to lower arts center usage. and there's a projected $280,000 transfer from the programming fund. This compares to a $265,000 transfer in fiscal '23, and this year is tracking to that basic level. So before we get into capital, that's the operating expense and revenue numbers. Any questions?
I just had one question regarding the, one of the items is effectively a $200,000 transfer out to the Great Island Special Revenue Fund. Are any of these expenses in here, like what are our assumptions around like the maintenance costs of Great Island, or is that under Public Works right now?
Right now, it's covered by the Special Revenue Fund for Great Island, and it would continue to be separated in that way.
And so where do we show the transfer out? What department is that underneath?
That's in transfers out to other funds, which is its own little world.
It's not within this budget.
So I mean, so that's just sort of a one-off. But who's actually performing the work? Is it Parks and Rec or Public Works?
At the moment, it is outsourced and managed by Public Works.
Was that contract
But-
renewed or no?
Actually, I
I thought it
think
stopped
we
at the end
either
of-
just put it out to bid or got quotes. So there is the idea of, should it be town employees or should it be outsourced? And at the moment, outsourcing it is less expensive.
And is that all inclusive of summertime, fall, and winter?
I don't know, I didn't do the bid. I can ask the town administrator to write something up on what the comparison is between doing it in-house versus outsourced.
Just because, one of my questions is this is sort of a higher policy level question. We originally created the Special Revenue Fund because the revenue coming in from the leases would allow us to do the things that we need to do for the leases. Because I think general revenue fund, or generally when it's expenses related to receiving the revenue, right?
Well, we're utilizing the rental revenue to support all of the maintenance and upkeep of the property as well as the buildings.
Well, yeah, but my question is now that there's a lot more, the rental revenue is cut in half. It's not sufficient to cover the whole island. And when I think about a special revenue fund, I generally, and rightfully or wrongly so, it's when I look at revenues coming in or used, from a policy perspective to offset the expenses that are incurred in generating those revenues. With this, the expenses, we're mowing 60 acres when, effectively, we're not
So the
leasing
balance
any
is,
land.
we were requested to segregate those expenses and track them so that there was visibility and transparency into them. So if we roll them into a town department, we lose some of that visibility and transparency. So by having the general fund support it, we can still track that as its own set of expenses and any revenues that we have and maintain that separation and that transparency.
Jim, speaking of policy issues, and as Jack likes to say, he likes to talk about dueling banjos. It will come a time when in fact, I hope that Great Island will be brought under regular and ordinary budget control, so that in fact, we don't have stuff going back and forth that somehow disappears off the major budget. And I think that's really important. And it should be broader than that, because I think that there should be coordination between Parks and Rec and Great Island, because they're to some degree could possibly have competing themes that they're chasing, or for that matter, better yet, they could coordinate to make sure that they cover whatever the town needs, one place or another, but not necessarily both. And there were a number of other things that came up during our Q&A session with Parks and Rec. We were looking at the recovery of and again, this is not strictly Parks and Rec, it's perhaps policy issues, but indeed, we found out that the dumping fee is going up for the town dump, and but yet we all pay for a dumping permit. And the dumping permit doesn't cover the benefit that we receive. There are beach stickers, there are sewer fees, and all the rest of it. Should the town, as a policy measure, review all of the things that are charged only to people who use them, to make sure that we are recovering what we should from those users, and the excess not necessarily charged broadly to the town. Obviously, there's a judgment call as to how much the town should absorb in general. The rent from the dance studio has declined, and which made me start to think about the reduction in rent out of the stables, and wondering whether, in fact, there's a consolidated or coordinated effort to ensure, if it's possible, that rental properties be actively seek lessees to keep up that revenue stream, as long as they're not otherwise being used for something else. And last but not least, we were pleased that the Meadow Trail is getting an estimate and coming in any day now. But there are lots of place setters out there in the 6-year capital budget, and Jen has explained that she maintains that carefully. But we keep getting whipsawed when fire trucks that were supposed to cost $500,000, and when we were told $1 million, end up costing $2 million, and it's going to sooner or later get in the way of our desire to, as to whether we want to bond some of these acquisitions, and indeed affect the way that the town manages itself going forward. So, I mean, all I can say is we would recommend that there be a more or less consistent effort that the capital schedule is reviewed not on a chronological annual basis, but it's reviewed whenever there is an outside event that would change the cost, so that people keep track of what's going on generally with regard, just to use an example, with fire trucks. And if in fact they're getting even more dear, that somebody take a pencil and X out the old number and write in the latest number, because if we don't, we're going to again find ourselves very unhappy trying to figure out whether to bond or whether we have to run some of these through current expenses. I guess that's about it for now.
Anything else on the operating budget? There are a number of capital items that I'm about to go through. So there's a proposed $396,000 of spending, capital spending, compared to $316,000 in fiscal '24. The largest item is $275,000 to repave the Nature Center driveway over at Jerry Lawn. It's unclear when this was last done, although there's a comment that it is, quote, deteriorated over the past 25 years. It is a priority one capital project according to the Parks and Rec Department. I took a look at it, and there is repair there that is definitely needed. I guess my question is, and I know they sought an estimate from an outside company. My question is, A, could we patch it versus pave it? And would we think that would be enough? And B, have our own Ed Gentile, who does paving for, or manages the paving for the rest of the town, has he taken a look at this? Because I would take great comfort in an estimate and a recommendation from him, and hopefully it's consistent with this proposal, but $275,000 is a lot of money to pave a driveway and a parking lot. And if it's needed, in his estimation, then I'm supportive, but I'm open to having my mind changed on that.
Is there a reason the town pays for that?
It's part of the park. It's part of the park. It's part of the Cherry Lawn Park. It is.
We're the lessor effectively
Yeah.
to the nature center.
I mean, I could see maybe like the road that leads to it, but then the
That's-
parking lot, I mean, should that not be a shared public-private partnership?
Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think, so the nature center, we lease that property to them, right?
I don't know.
So, open question.
Jim, I think you're right.
So, yeah, one of my bigger questions here, and this is kind of relates to just capital projects in general, there's been a ton of talk at the Parks and Rec Commission about, traffic driveway, how that's all designed up there and everything. And I know this is sort of
Yeah.
off to the right.
Yeah.
And so one of my questions was, and there's always talk of like a parking study, and I know this is a little bit off to the right, but it could be a lot of different ways in which that is all done up, is traffic flow could be changed up there. Can it be just patched and push it off a year or so? If they're going to go, I think they talked about it, and do a bigger study of should that be redesigned, should there be an in and out driveway or something, so that when we go and pave it, we're doing it all at one time. If that was to be the
So
result of.
there's that. So should we spend the money and then learn that we're going to modify the traffic through that park? There's also, should we be I don't know if the vendor from which the estimate was obtained is the vendor that we should be using. I would, again, think it would make sense to consolidate our paving activity through a single vendor and obtain scale discounts, and I'm not sure that the Parks and Rec vendor is the same vendor that the town would use, the Public Works Department would use. So again, I think that's why for a project of this scale that's paving, and maybe he's already been involved, so involving a Gentile in that project would make a lot of sense. There's also, while we're on it, go ahead, David.
No, I was just gonna say, on that particular point, there is $8,500
That's what
in
I'm
there.
saying, yeah.
In there for a traffic study at Cherry Lawn. So if we're already gonna spend the money on a traffic study, and we may be looking at potentially redesigning the driveway or location of parking and those types of things, maybe a patch and wait until we get the results from that is a good
So while
idea.
we're on the traffic study, I'm skeptical that, I'm not really quite sure what a traffic study is, the scope of a traffic study. If it's counting cars that are entering the park, that's not going to tell us a lot of information. It's going to tell us that in certain periods of time, there's too many people entering the park or exiting the park. What we do with
Fair
that
enough.
information based on the level of information. So it maybe a utilization study is what we need. So how
Yeah, that sounds right.
are our residents, and are they our residents, using that park? Can we program more efficiently? Can we plot traffic more efficiently? It's a much more nuanced question than just running a traffic study and spending $8,000 and finding out that we got too many cars coming in at 2 windows, Monday through Friday. So I'm skeptical. I was going to suggest maybe we table the traffic study until we have a better understanding of what kind of information we're going to get from that, and how might it be used.
Well, I think to answer your point, I think there have been other things that are coming in front of this board where, if I can summarize, our general feelings are, when things are coming from us, now this is 8,000, is it?
Yep,
Okay.
$8,500.
$8,500. It's relatively small, but I think the sense was when things come in front of us that could lead to kind of bigger projects and so forth, we want to see a more detailed write-up of, this is what the traffic study is going to do. It's going to include usage, it's going to include redesigning, a south entrance and a north entrance or exit. I'd like to sort of understand what it is that they're actually specifically going to request, and then approve it. It's only $8,000, so we could approve it at any point in the future. But I do think, small studies like this that could lead to, just paving the nature center is $275,000. So small sort of studies that could lead to large capital projects, I'd like to understand a little bit more about what it's going to involve.
My concern is not just that, but that we do a traffic study, and however the traffic study is designed leads us to the wrong conclusion, because it's obvious that that park is too crowded at certain times of the day. And that suggests what kind of program should be added or not be added. If we were, for example, to take one of the tennis courts and add pickleball lines, and now we have 8 pickleball courts instead of 4, are we going to create a bigger problem than solving a solution by adding more pickleball capacity? So maybe the answer is yes, but that's why I think we have to understand what is happening at that park. It's a very popular, congested park, and adding programming may not make sense until we understand what it's going to do to the, and it's a safety issue. There's a lot of small kids. There's buses that are dropping people off there. There have been fender accidents there because people are double parked and at certain times of day, et cetera. So I think just spending $8,500 for a traffic study isn't going to answer those questions. So I would suggest tabling that.
And rolling back the paving project to be just a patching project so that you can fold that into a proper analysis of what should happen. in
Unless we're
general.
convinced that regardless of how we might reprogram or redraw the roads in there, that part wouldn't be touched. I mean, it's pretty remote. The parking lot's pretty remote, the nature center parking. But yes, I agree with you. Unless we're convinced that there's virtually no chance that would be modified, then that would support just patching versus paving.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're going in and out the same skinny driveway. One could decide that you want to enter in south of the current entrance.
Yes.
By where the nature center is,
Yes.
and exit north.
Yes.
I'm not the traffic study person, but I do think, let's hear what that entire study is going to do. Usage, if 50% of the cars are non-resident versus resident, let's times.
And then partner with Adjournment to get it built,
Yeah.
bid out to a more efficient paver and probably do the big project for less than $275 for that portion of it as well.
Right. So while we're on Cherry Lawn, there are 2 other items for Cherry Lawn. One is the basketball court, which was just done 3 years ago, 4 years. It was within the last 5 years. And you take a basketball court, there's a crack going right down the middle of the line from baseline to baseline. It's a single crack, but it extends the entire, and based on the conversation at the Board of Selectmen meeting, they're spending $22,000 to do a high-quality repair of this crack, such that it won't occur again. There's clearly, if that crack is a single crack, it looks like there was either a foundational issue or a misjudgment as to how the terrain was or whatever, but they're convinced that this $22,000 will solve this problem for more than 2 to 5 years. So I'm supportive of the $22,000 repair of the basketball court, and it's it's really the only town basketball court outside of the schools, and it's heavily used.
Is there no, when you install a court like that, I know I looked at installing a court in our backyard, and there was a warranty associated with the installation. Is there no warranty on installation of that?
That I don't
court?
know, but I can tell you that this item and the Baker Park fence replacement were pulled out, and you have already funded them through ARPA. So in the Park and Rec 6-year plan, that's why they have a couple of asterisks indicating that they're funded through ARPA.
And do we know, are we using the same vendor for the repair that installed the court? Since they were responsible
I
for the
believe
crack?
so, but I would have to double check on that.
Well, I'm just thinking, they installed the court.
I totally understand.
They caused the crack.
I just don't know what
I wouldn't give them
the
more
plan is.
business.
No, well,
I mean, there are plenty of court companies that will come do a crack repair. I wouldn't reward them for faulty installation.
so all right, so on the Baker Park fence, my only question on that, I take your point, Jen, my only question on that is, the fence is in most disrepair closest to the playground, which is scheduled to be replaced. So if the playground installation is going to require the dismantling of the fence, then we ought to wait on this, even though we've already approved it. If it's not, if it's just going to come from the parking lot over the ground and install that way, then then it's a non-issue. So I would, even though we've approved it, maybe we can delay it until we understand if the playground is going to interfere with that fence or not, the installation of the playground, which is also, I think, an ARPA,
Correct.
right? Right. All right, back to Cherry Lawn. As you enter the park, you go left, you keep going, or you go around, and then you go up toward the baseball field. That's the overflow lot. As you go up that, that's not paved, but there is a stone embankment and there's stairs, and those are in disrepair. The embankment isn't really a safety issue, but the stairs are in pretty rough shape. And that's a $9,000 item, and so I would advocate funding that.
I think that should be a part of the whole study and project. That could be eliminated.
Well, it depends on the timing. I think if you look at the stairs, it's a safety issue. So I think the stairs need to be repaired sooner versus later.
As low as that retaining wall is, it almost looks like it could be graded out where you wouldn't actually.
The
need
retaining
that.
wall is not, I don't think that, listen, it's an eyesore, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. But the stairs, if you look at the stairs, it's a problem.
You saying from the lower parking lot up to the upper?
Yeah, so as you go around, and instead of going straight into the upper overflow parking lot, you keep going around. Right on your right is a couple of stairs leading from that circle up into the overflow lot. So if you park in the overflow lot, you're using those stairs. And those are in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
And that's gonna cost, I don't know if it's gonna cost $9,000, but, I mean, listen, I think stairs need to be fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I just think
Sooner versus
later.
the traffic that actually uses the stairs, I mean, you certainly don't have to. I mean, the reason to go from the upper lot to the lower lot is, I don't even know. Like, I would go to the fields, or I'd go to the playground, or I'd go to the
Well, I
baseball.
parked in the upper lot a lot of times because.
Right, but then if you're going to baseball, if you're going to the playground, or you're going to the field, like, you would
I think
not
it's-
even go that way.
I think it's one accident, and we're gonna
It's a
regret spending not
liability.
$9,000 to repair the stairs. If
I
somebody
would
breaks
have
their
said
ankle
if
or
it's a
something.
safety issue, it's
Yeah,
done.
yeah, I mean, that's my judgment, so I looked at it, that's my judgment, so,
Yep.
I mean, I can be proven wrong on that, but I would advocate this 9,000, or maybe a portion of it to repair the stairs. Okay, last two items in this capital budget are $50,000 to replace the Wheat Beach Gatehouse. I guess it's been there for 20 years or something like that. I drove by it. I think it needs a paint job. I don't know that it needs replaced. You can't see inside it, so it could be kind of rough inside it. So I'd be open to a field trip to determine whether we really need to replace this, or whether it can just be repainted. It looks structurally sound to the lay eye, but maybe we bring along somebody that can confirm that.
My bigger question on that gatehouse, right? And as we begin to think about Great Island, and we begin to think about, what, if anything, they may do on Cherry Lawn, is there not a technology solution where you can just read license plates the same way our parking staff does and throughout all of our parking lots in town to see if you have a permit, where the gate just goes up or down based on the license plate that comes up? Because if that's a way, that could be a way to, over time, eliminate FTEs, right? Improve technology, get more data, and it could be a way, if, for example, like some of our other park assets in town, like Weed Beach and Pear Tree Point, they restrict those to residents. Because we're parking restricted, I think, at both of those beaches, right? There's just never enough spots. They could choose to do the same thing, in theory, at Cherry Lawn if we're constrained there in terms of parking spots. So before we go and kind of rebuild that whole thing, I'd like to see if there's a way to use some technology to manage that.
The only other thing I would say is that the write-ups talked about doing like this stainless building kind of thing. And, for a structure that's unlike the one at Pear Tree where they install it and remove it every year, this building is permanent in its physical location. I'm wondering if more traditional construction modes would be less than 50 grand for the size of the building. You know, pour pad, erect a wooden structure, put some nice shingles on it, windows. It would be aesthetically pleasing because it would be in fitting with, you know, the town per se, and might be cheaper than 50 grand for a stainless steel building that gets put in. If after the field trip we determine that it should be done.
And then the last item is 21,000 to strip one of the paddle courts at Weed Beach and strip the paint and repaint it. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news here for this capital budget, but I looked at it today and I didn't see that there was an issue with the paint in this paddle court. So if, again, maybe somebody can take me down there and show me where the issue is, but I walked the paddle courts and didn't see any issue. I thought they were actually in pretty good shape. And so, listen,
Okay.
this was somebody put this on the list for a reason, so I'm happy to listen and maybe I'm open on this one, but I did not see the need to spend $20,000 to put a fresh coat of paint on one of the paddle boats.
And Jen, unless I read it incorrectly, the project summary sheet shows $20,600 as the total cost, but I'm pretty sure that if you look in 25, 26, and 26, 27 of the capital plan, there's another 20 grand each of those years.
Yeah, this is
So
one
the, so
court,
the,
this is
so
court
the,
two.
the total cost may be 20,000 for.
Yeah,
one-
we can update that.
20,000 for one court, but the total cost for the project is 60.
We can update that.
And to be clear, in past years on the Parks and Rec budget, I've been all in favor of keeping our parks in the highest quality condition and spending the money, whether it's in a maintenance budget or in a capital budget, to do so. But what I didn't see on this last item particularly is the need to do it, at least to my eye.
Well, don't they have, I mean, last year there was 20,000 in there as well, wasn't there? So-
Yeah, this has been going on over
I mean,
time.
so is this just that they do one per year, or are they saying this one actually needs to be done?
Well, there's more budgeted in future years, but this is court two, I
Yeah.
think is.
Yeah.
It says the second of 5 courts, so I'm assuming it's court two, at least in the proposal.
Can I,
So-
can I ask a couple other questions just quickly? The Meadow and Trail project has been pulled out,
Yes.
Yes.
right? Is that now going to be an off-cycle item because it doesn't show up in future years either?
Yeah, possibly depending on what comes out of the Board of Selectmen did not want to do anything with it until they got more information.
And I think that kind of gets back to the traffic study thing. I think John was generally saying, before he brings things forward, we actually want to have more specific detail on everything. So I think that's why they pulled it out.
So I will say that's a little challenging during the budget process. Some of these, I think, the estimates can be improved, but we are, in some cases, you know, close to 18 months out before we even start the project when we're putting these numbers together. And we can't do a full bid and say, oh, hold that price for 12 months while we get the budget in place. So these are going to be imprecise. I think we can get them as good as we can get them, but they're not going to be numbers as though we actually bid them.
But as long as the process is comprehensive within those limitations to come up with the estimate.
Yes, and that's why we require
Sometimes
that
they
the
are, and
departments get
sometimes
quotes.
they're not, yeah.
And Jen, one other thing for you. On Pear Tree Beach, the Park and Rec summary document overall says that one of their goals and objectives is to request and obtain approval for the funding for the boat ramp in the parking lot. That's for this current year objective, goal and objective. But the capital plan budgets $6.6 million for that project in 2026-27.
Yeah, it's in and out year. It is not expected to be funded in the current year. If it were expected to be
So
funded in the
they're
current
gonna-
year, we would have.
But they're
to
gonna
pick it up.
request and obtain approval for funding?
So I think that,
It's a language
It-
thing. To me, if you're requesting and receiving approval for funding.
yes, and so it's an
it
error that
wouldn't-
it's in
okay,
their,
all right,
their budget
All
right
right, cool. I just want to make sure.
So on Park and Rec capital, Dan, there's actually a second page of their 6-year capital plan that includes 4 more appropriations, small cap, AEDs, hook truck, and a stand-on blower.
But those were,
Those are
but-
recommended by the Board of Selectmen.
okay, my recollection is they were pulled by the Board of Selectmen, by Kate.
Nope.
Okay, well, we'll have to circle back on those items. I actually put X's on each one of those, watching the Board of Selectmen meeting. So, okay.
Well, on-
Maybe you were watching, maybe I was
Maybe
watching
it
last
got,
year's
maybe it
meeting.
got late and they weren't speaking so clearly. But
On the-
we have them in the budget.
Well, on the hook truck, the description of why they want it sounds like it makes sense, but there's no discussion about how old is the existing truck, things like residual value, what are they gonna do with it, trade it, like all the standard questions you always ask. There's no information about those items. And for the stand-on blower at $15,000, it says that the reason that they want it is it's an opportunity to work more efficiently and faster, but there is no data to support how much faster, how much more efficiently, and if you look through their budget, there is no overtime savings from the addition of a third blower unit at $15,000. So I just came away thinking in a year in which the budget is strained already, this might fall into the nice-to-have category, not the need-to-have.
So to be clear, Jen, which are the 4 that,
Small capital, AED replacement, the hook truck, and the stand-on blower.
okay.
So I have a question for all of you on what you want to do in terms of some process. So we didn't have a lot of questions on the smaller budgets. When we get to the larger one, it's not just those who were tasked with reviewing it that have questions, but, you know, everybody's dug into it and has questions, which a lot of times we could answer if we got them in advance, and on the fly can be a little bit difficult. For next week's meeting, would it be possible to have those who are assigned as the liaisons also gather questions if another member has a question, so that we do get that ahead of time, because
Sure.
we're going to be bumping up against the approval deadline.
That's a great idea, yeah.
Okay.
But still have them just funnel through whoever the designated lead is.
And I guess tonight's questions on some of these, I mean, I think you can determine which ones are small, medium, and large questions. If you could maybe bring us feedback, we can maybe, if any of those we need to touch on, either next meeting.
Yeah, I
or-
think what we should do with each meeting is start with kind of the follow-ups from the prior meeting. And, you know, I can report back on all of these. There was a question on X, Y, or Z, and here's the response. And then we can get into the new budgets. But I think if other members who aren't assigned to it have questions, it would be helpful to get those ahead of time, so we can make sure that we have thorough responses available at the time that we're reviewing the budgets.
My only comment was sometimes the questions are prompted by the discussion here.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
right, so absent that, right.
Exactly, but I think there's probably some that we knew ahead of time.
Yep, yep.
We wanted to have asked.
Jim,
Yeah, Kay?
two things. I do want to build upon what John was talking about before, and it does deal with parking. But
Hey, Jack, if this was gonna be more than like 30 seconds, I'd just say come up here just so others can hear you.
I'm sorry.
Got to make sure you're on the record, my friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your comments are always good, so it's good for people to hear.
Jack Davis, 197 Hoyt Street. So I'm going to build a little bit upon what John said, and it has to do partly with the traffic study, but some other things as well. We have Park and Rec, we have Great Island, we have town-owned property, we have Board of Ed properties, all of which are open space. And this is where we're getting into dueling banjos. What are we using for fields? How many walkways do we need? How many need to be ADA compliant? Where are we putting playgrounds? Where aren't we putting playgrounds? And I think that it almost needs to be a town to step back and say, what's our open space strategy for the town? And then things fall into place because things can be prioritized. Okay, we want to fix this one over here, we're going to do that. So that's one thing that I think we need to take a step back before we're doing it, as well as the fact that a traffic study for one park, how does that fit into the overall open space that we have? And that's even with understanding that we're not going to know what's going on at Great Island for maybe another year or so, because they'll first be coming with a master plan. The second thing, from just listening, is that we have a couple of departments that have a real lot on their plate. You have ARPA projects that are going on. You have projects that we've already approved in the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures, and we have new capital projects. At what time are we asking some of the departments to do more than what they're physically capable of doing? And I don't know the answer, and I know that's really a Board of Selectmen answer, but in a very tough budget year where we may be taxing for some of our capital projects or using some cash to pay down certain things, this is a real good time to ask that, and that would be one of my questions for the next ones that are coming back, because we're going to be dealing with Public Works, which has a lot on their plate.
And we do have that conversation with the departments, particularly with Public Works, because they have
A tremendous
ARPA,
amount.
RFCNRE, a ton of work with Great Island, and the conversation is had with Ed, basically, can you do all that you are requesting?
Yeah.
And in the
Yeah.
current, in the current budget, he has scaled back what he would normally ask for because he is oversubscribed.
Yes, and I'm not, believe me, I'm not
But I'm saying that we
suggesting
do have
that
that conversation with the department
Right,
heads.
but I think that that's something that's worthwhile to have a discussion here, to know what they've said and that it's been done and other things like that. I'm not suggesting that we don't manage this well. We do an excellent job in managing it. But I think it's something for the Board of Finance, and I know F&B will be considering the answers to that as well. So those are two things. One is an overall open space plan, especially with the advent of Great Island. That's where the dueling banjos start to come. How many fields are doing what? What's doing that? There was a field study done when we did Highland Farms that said utilization of that. Are we all charging different amounts and everything? And yet we're the same organization, whether or not it's in Peter's pocket or Paul's pocket, we're the same place. So those are two of my things to consider, and I think from our own committee, I had heard from Jenny that she had the same thoughts on deferring the traffic study until we had a better strategic plan on that. And the mere fact is 8,500, as Jim mentioned, if it comes in and that's what everybody wants, that's a quick approval out of your reserve fund for capital non-recurring asset contingency. So, but for right now, it may be worthwhile to hold off.
To your first point, wouldn't the Plan of Conservation and Development be a perfect opportunity for the town to come together and answer the question about open space, and how are all these different spaces?
That's at a really,
purposed?
really high level. What I think is we need to sit down and say, where's our work? Here's our, if we have 20 different properties that we have in town, who controls what? Which ones are we going to put walking place in? Which one do we need to have paved? Which ones need to be ADA compliant? Which ones are going to have playgrounds? Which one is the age of the playground? I always like to talk about the difference between the two beaches, is that Weed Beach is Disney World and Pear Tree Point is Rye Playland. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have to both be prepared, but what's your strategy? What's the characteristics you want? Pear Tree's a quieter beach. Weed Beach is more family-oriented in that. I used to joke you go to Pear Tree if you want to play with the crabs. So the fact of the matter is that I don't know that with the advent of what we have with Highland, with the advent of now Great Island, I really think taking a step back on some of this, and it's probably best led by John, in the Board of Selectmen, I think that that's a really detailed analysis to be done, and I facilitated things similar to that in my professional career, but it really goes down, and then it says, okay, here's what we want, here's what we don't have, here's the priorities in the town as a whole. This is for Park and Rec, this is for Great Island, this is what we're going to do on the Board of Ed, because it's all coming out of the same capital pocket. So that's just a suggestion that I have in having listened to this and the growth that we have, so.
I
anyway.
would suggest that both you, Jack, and you, Dan, are exactly right. You need to have a top-down view from the whole town, and then you need a bottom-up view in terms of what's going on. I mean, what you mentioned, Jim, was wonderful. I mean, we have this access problem. If you guys are talking about how to control access for Great Island, farm it out to the two beaches we have, so we can use the same system. I don't know when it all comes together at the same time, but at least you put it on the plate so that people can think about it.
And then we know when something capital comes in, oh, it fits here. Right now, I mean, we know that we have the Wheat Beach initiative going on. I don't know how that fits into the strategy of the open space. I'm not for it or against it, but I don't know how it fits in here. Where I would love to be able to say, well, we all agree this is the open space, we're going to have a walkway because of this, we want to have pasture land because of this, because this is what the grand design is. Right now, I have a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and whoever plays the best banjo gets the money.
Yeah. I mean, Jack, I think sometimes I say, with all due respect, like government sometimes works a little bit slower than private industries. I think that's sometimes good. I think projects, whether they are large capital projects, whether you're making significant changes in the way you operate, they all don't necessarily need to be figured out in 2 weeks. They can be rethought, consolidated. So.
Well, we did that, 10-year plan.
That's the
Right, a while ago, and it
Plan of
caused all
conservation and
sorts
development.
of
But
consternation.
that's very different. That's in terms of how the plan, the town sort of functions, not necessarily, that's not an operational plan.
But the operational plan can't be inconsistent with the plan of conservation. I think to John's point, you can't do one without knowing what the other one's going to say. So you can do the plan of conservation development, which can feed into the operating plan, but to do the operating plan without having first done or doing it in conjunction with a plan of conservation development doesn't make sense either, in my judgment. So maybe one doesn't suffice for the other, but they have to be hand in hand. They have to be complementary.
Well, I'd recommend, listen, it's a few pages, but if you read in the plan of conservation and development, there's specific discussions around in that, like the strategy is the town will look to acquire open space. It'll look to do so when that open space is adjacent to other space and when that can be used to support like school, parks and rec, sort of other types of activities and so forth. It doesn't necessarily get into, once you get it, like what time should you have pickle versus tennis versus baseball, but I agree. I think we should be looking holistically at all of this.
So just to wrap up on Parks and Rec, I think the operating budget, I'm supportive of virtually everything, if not literally everything in the operating budget, but I think there's some more work we have to do on the capital budget.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the things I liked about the operating budget, remind me, was $11,000 with respect to additional work related to invasive species, what they were doing up at
It was
Cherry
part
Lawn.
of the maintenance, yeah.
Yeah, so I like, I do think that's a good case study when that department used sort of free time, if you will, that employees had to go out and sort of do that without, there was relatively a small amount of overtime, I think, used to clean up acres and acres up there. But I think while it's a little bit slower than doing it all at once, it's certainly cheaper and I think a more efficient use of our, sort of employee partners here. And Jen, in terms of how much we have on our plate, I think one of the things I'd like to just look at is, I think next week is Public Works. Mm-hmm. We have new sidewalks, another like $1.3 million-ish of Either
I think rehab is.
sorry, rehab's $1.3 million, news like 160, 170.
Some smaller amount, yeah.
I know in our annual package, the financial report that we look at, there's a fair amount of money that looks like it's,
So I think we didn't fund the rehab because Ed has so much money unspent on rehab.
well, I think there's $1 million.
It's a small amount.
Oh, no, that's paving, sorry.
Yeah, he had requested 500, Kate did not fund it, for 500 for rehab. 1.3 is for paving. Kate did not move forward his request for sidewalk rehab, nor did the Board of Selectmen. So because he has funds that are already appropriated, he's going to use those rather than requesting additional funds in fiscal '24.
Yeah, there's like $1.4 million, I think, left in the sidewalk rehabilitation fund.
I forget if it's that much.
Or, sorry, $1 million.
We did
Two.
3 years' worth of funding into the bond funds. He's done 1 year, he's in the midst of the second year of using the second year of funding. And then he has about a year's worth left. So that's why we're not funding any sidewalk rehab in the fiscal '25 capital.
Were any sidewalks being funded with ARPA dollars?
No.
Yeah, yes, yep. So next item, Taylor, if you want to mark, is the library,
Yep.
the annual grant.
I think, do you want to kick it off? Is that, yeah, that was the plan.
Okay. We had a very good meeting with Kara and Kim Westcott of the library and trustees, and Taylor and I attended for the Board of Finance. And FOB was Jack and Louisa and Elizabeth Maracola. Our library, while a small proportion of the town's annual budget, is, together with our schools and parks and recreation assets, a highly visible and extremely valuable part of what Darien is and how our town presents itself. The aggregate size of the proposed budget and year-over-year growth in percent and dollars. Darien Library is essentially as we just said, it's a public-private partnership wherein, through the annual grant, the town reimburses the library for its operating expenses, and the Friends of Darien Library, through state aid, fundraising, library revenue, and income from its endowment, supports capital expenditures to maintain the library building and infrastructure, including books, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and the maintenance thereof. The library has proposed that the town approve a grant for this coming year of $4,547,579. OpenGov has it listed as $4,562,956.
Yes, they had a decrease that came in after the Board of Selectmen approved the budget.
Okay. That's a 3.5% increase over the prior year's grant of $4,393,539, more or less. Driving that are increases in salary of 3.96%, benefits of 4.97%, and risk management of 5.5%, offset by reduced building operations and other library support. There are no proposed FTE changes, and staffing levels remain at 70.
During our discussion, we looked at staff compensation, which accounts for about 87% of the total grant if you combine salary and benefits. The library provided documentation demonstrating that salaries still remain below lower Fairfield County benchmarks, with Darien competitive for entry-level salaries, but later on, for more senior positions, falling behind due to lack of steps and union representation. They've asked for 3% raises for most employees this year, but a certain set of them will receive more. The library is justly proud of its benefits package, including health, dental, long-term disability, and pension coverage. When added to salaries, total compensation for Darien becomes more competitive than Greenwich, Stamford, Westport, Wilton, and is only exceeded by New Canaan, which could easily be due to differing staff mixes. The library observes that over the past 6 years, 70% of the staff have left for other opportunities, with salary and total cost of living, or local cost of living and commuting time mentioned as the reasons. And several of their final round candidates have declined the library's job offers to take higher paid positions elsewhere. Because this issue, it bubbled up that what if we could offer like an à la carte menu of benefits and salary to make everyone happy, to get what we, instead of trying to increase salary and maintaining a rich benefits package, what if we could, offer them a little more flexibility, depending on what was more important. We hope we can investigate the feasibility of that in the coming year. Separately, we did ask about the salaried positions that are funded by the Friends, because not all headcount is funded by the town. Development coordinator, for instance, is funded by the Friends, and we did confirm that their benefits are also being paid for by the Friends. The library has had great success in controlling its healthcare costs, which should be a model for the rest of the town in the coming year, if there's anything to be learned from that. And we also understand that the town is negotiating an operating agreement between itself and the library for a go-forward basis to formalize the role the town plays in the agreement between the library and the town for the future. John, sorry, you're going to wrap it up.
One of the questions we always ask ourselves is whether there were any specific budget items that we're uncomfortable with or warrant further attention. While we're not uncomfortable with the library's budget per se, we would encourage prompt completion of the formal agreement between the town and library, and look forward to incorporate its recommendations into the budget for this coming year.
On the last point, before we're going to get into the broader discussion, John and I have kind of worked with staff and so forth in terms of putting together a simple grant agreement that could be used. So therefore, we would document it in a similar way that we document others. I don't think it changes anything operationally. I think it's a good sort of audit and procedure perspective, just to have something in place that'll just say, we're giving the agreement for this, this is what to be used for. As they normally do, they keep us up to date on their budgets, present to us each year as they do during the budget cycle. If there's excess, they return it. I think just some of the core features of the understanding would be represented in that. I think it sounds like that can be ready, by July 1
It was noted
when the
that
grant is made.
no current surplus on this year's budget of any real size. Thank you, Kira, for making that conversation possible at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night.
As well as the follow-up answers.
Any other questions in the library? Okay. Well, that's it for the specific discussion items. The other things are to discuss other open or upcoming appropriations. A couple I would make you all aware of is the Board of Ed came to us with an appropriation for school buses, handicap buses, and Suburbans. I sent around to you all, I think this morning or late yesterday, an updated, I think this is version 4 or 5 of the Board of Ed's memo that included some of the questions that we had sent to them, but also included some new ideas where they're modeling defined contribution plans. They're looking at, I guess, Sprinter vans, which are cheaper to operate than the 30-passenger buses. Again, I didn't have a chance to go fully through that. They were discussing that tonight, and I think they plan to get back to us with, more of the questions we'd asked for around usage and so forth. So I think more to come on that. I would take a look at at that memo that's sent around. Also included in that memo, I think they're discussing tonight another off-cycle security appropriation, which is over $1 million. So we'll know more about that, I think, at the end of their meeting tonight. And I think the other thing I would say is something I've been working with that John had asked me to put together, and I owe Jen and Kate a version of the spreadsheet, but beginning to track all of the upcoming and pending appropriations that are sort of in the pipeline, whether they include ones related to stormwater, flooding, bridges, both out on Hanson and on leading out to Great Island, Pear Tree Point project, all of these, one sort of master file where we can all look at these and know what's kind of coming down the pipeline. Because I think to John's point, a lot of these things were talked about, and the numbers that were originally proposed start small, get big, start big, get small, or just unknown, if you will, as it relates to like the dredging, get the main dredging getting into the harbor, the Norotan Harbor, or things like the Norotan Heights retaining wall, where we don't necessarily have a good number on yet. But I think it'll be one thing that perhaps we can either add, if not monthly or maybe bi-monthly, to our financial reporting package, Jen, just to keep things updated. Maybe quarterly?
I think maybe at the time that you're making decisions about capital projects, so that you're not making that decision in a vacuum, to look at where everything is.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's much value in updating it on a monthly basis.
Okay, maybe quarterly or semi-annually?
I think when you receive requests for capital items.
Yeah.
Now, we can discuss timing. It's just, I think I've said it before, I don't like tracking for the sake of tracking. If it's going to provide information that you would use or need for making a decision, absolutely, it should be updated and available and timely at that time. But just to have it recurring when there's nothing going on that needs to be discussed about it is busy work that, quite frankly, I don't have time for.
So I would suggest maybe some of the tracking that we've asked you to do, maybe let's revisit if it's not adding value that we thought it might.
I think what we have in the financial report right now is.
Okay.
I think those are all very good items that we're keeping an eye on. And there may be
ARPA
others
and Great
that.
Island, right, basically?
Yeah, those are the ones that we've added, and eventually those will fall off.
Right.
But I think, if you have a capital item that's coming to you, whether it's to be funded by bonding, off-cycle, whatever, we can definitely provide it in conjunction with the annual budget process, but also with these other off-cycle ones. It's not going to change much between when you look at it and when the next decision needs to be made, so we would refresh it at that time. So again, you can see that fresh look on what's swirling around out there.
Yeah. I think one of the values I see in not necessarily updating it every month, but in just us beginning to take a look at these and begin to plan ahead is this something we want to take out of the general fund, or is this something we want to bond for? To begin to think about, we've talked about funding some of these upcoming capital projects from the general fund, or whether we should be taxing for some of them. I think it would be good for us to begin to get our head around, do we want to tax, do we want to use general fund, or do we want to bond? Just so that there's only so much we can take out of the general fund, right?
So I guess my question would be, how would you need more criteria or kind of decision points other than just what do we have coming down the pike? I think, you need some parameters or some guidance on how far do you want to draw fund balance down. I think there's more decision points than just what are the potential capital items. So maybe we can make it a little more robust report that comes in when you get a capital request.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I added to it was what the debt service cost is. If
Yeah.
we chose to bond something, what is a 20-year or 30-year, debt cost? Because that's added to the budget every year.
And, maybe when a request comes to you, you have the list of everything that's out there, but for that particular item, we always show, if you funded it through fund balance, what would your percentage be? If you funded it through debt issuance, what would the estimated debt service be? If you tax for it based on the current mill rate, based on the current grant list, what's the millage associated with that particular project? I think if those are our three funding sources, let's see what's the impact of utilizing each funding source.
the direction you're going with respect to all of these projects is exactly right. There are some other things that are going on that would be, after the end of each budget cycle, everybody pretty much goes back to doing whatever they were doing before the budget cycle started. And somehow the summer gets away from us and so on. Is it useful at all to write down some of the things, for example, this review of health insurance that you and Jay-Z have been talking about, to basically say, okay, this is a project we want to do, these are the people that are responsible for it, this is when they're supposed to report to us as to how they're coming. There's obviously, you guys are doing excellent work on this buses study. The business continuity exercise is something that this town needs to go through. I mean, everybody's getting cybercrime to death, and whatever else is there out there that the town needs to plan for. We've talked about pensions as well, in terms of, is there a way to manage pensions to the benefit of the school? And it goes on and on and on and so on. I mean, one thing that's not on the capital, at least I couldn't find on the capital schedule, is my favorite topic, Rings End Dam. That's going to cost some money, and that ought to be on there somewhere. And I know that Ed, the last time I asked him about it, said that they were still talking with FINRA, but that's just a funding issue, not a cost issue. It's up to, we ought to know what the proposed cost is going to be as soon as they can come up with a number.
Okay, well, that's one of the items I have on this, is an estimate of what, if anything, may need to be done on that. But perhaps what we could do is, once we pass the budget on the 9th, we have a little bit of downtime where, we take the hot potato and hand it to Jack and Jenny and the team on the RTM. We can use that to maybe design over the next 4 or 5 months, if there are certain things we want to maybe visit or focus on at each of our meetings, sort of an agenda review of things that we can dig a little deeper on and investigate sort of over the quieter summer months to be ready for the next budget cycle.
Okay.
The only other thing I would say is that another one of the town's great assets is relatively low property taxes. And the challenge for our board and for the RTM and for the Board of Selectmen is to make sure we're funding excellent schools and excellent town services, but, prudently managing the taxes that our residents pay, and that's the job we have. But I would say 6.5% and 8% increases in operating budgets aren't something we just want to pass through to our taxpayers. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that our taxpayers feel like they're getting value for owning real estate in Darien and enjoying excellent schools and excellent town services. So that's why we have this process and why we have these debates.
Well, yeah, and I think looking at what the total cost of the taxpayer is, I mean, a lot of these items, a $50,000 item here, the incremental cost to a taxpayer is relatively small. What I look at is what the total cost of the taxpayer is, and how does that compare to our sort of counterparts here in Southern Fairfield, those in Westchester, those kind of further north, and so forth. And with not including the additional appropriations coming from the Board of Ed for, $850 for the transportation, $1 million plus for the, potential for the security that we're discussing tonight. Where are they at? I think it's 7.4% for the 7.3% for the average homeowner, right? Including changes in the grand list, including shifting of the tax burden slightly from the commercial property base to the residential property
Well, I think it's
base.
a 7.3% increase in the taxes needed for the budget.
Okay, then it was 7.5, I think, for the average.
Well, on the median, it's significantly more than that, because the median has grown considerably. On taxes on a median residential assessment
Yep.
from last year versus 25 is an 11.25% increase.
And what is that in dollar terms?
$1,700.
So $1,700 on the median house price if we pass the budgets as proposed.
Yep, but the median has changed. I mean,
Yes.
I look at the average.
these are
Yeah,
just, these
yeah.
are just benchmarks. They're
Right.
not, yeah.
Yeah, but it's,
I mean, we could also say, on what's the impact on $1 million of assessed value?
right.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is in the mid-sevens.
That would be
Because the
70.
average homeowner's home, whether they are, and we did the testing of the quintiles, whether it's $1 million, $2 million, or $3 million, is up by 29%. The grand list itself is only up by 25%.
And we don't want to pass 7 to 11% tax increases to our residents.
No.
That's just, this board, personally, I don't want to sign up for that.
Yeah, I mean, the guidance I gave on December, in December
Out of town.
at the state of the town, was incorporating certain inflationary impacts, was 4% of increase in spending, knowing that the increase in the grand list, let's just call it more properties, not necessarily just the nominal increase in terms of revaluation, was going to offset that a little bit and get it down to a 3 handle. This is, this is the highest ever.
Right. And we have resources to help mitigate that, and this is not for this budget discussion, but maybe as a summer project to add to John's list is we haven't gone through the rest of the town's budget yet, but just sticking with the town's budget, the town's operating budget is proposed up 8%. And I haven't found in the operating budget really any fluff. So the question is, as I think our first selectman put it in one of the Board of Selectmen meetings, you have to examine the scope of what the town is offering as its residents in order to get to the 8% and get it significantly lower. And that's not something we're going to do within this budget cycle, but maybe it's something we should do off-cycle. It's not within our scope to look at the schools that way. So we have less ability to kind of look at the school. That's the Board of Education's responsibility. But we can certainly look at the scope of the services that the town is offering and determine whether there's anything that should be re-examined.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we're going to be
Doing this
faced with
again.
these kinds of operating increases year after year after year, and that's absent debt service, which is, as we know, is going up.
Yeah.
But we have a substantial fund balance, and we should look as to, should we use that to buy down the mill rate at some specified number or percentage year to year?
And we will, but our friends at Moody's changed the ratings criteria with the recent release, so Jen has some work to do to evaluate what that means for.
And we should also compare the increase to surrounding towns and what type of services they provide to their citizens.
I would just caution that comparing just mill rates, it can be a little bit tricky, because there's models where it's an all-in mill rate and you're not going to pay user fees. There's ones where it's an extremely low mill rate and you're going to pay for every other service. And so it's not always necessarily apples to apples on mill rates. And we fall somewhere in the middle.
Well, 7.5% tax increases are just not something that I necessarily support, so. Okay, any other questions? All good? Okay, motion to adjourn. John moves, Paul seconds, all those in favor? We stand adjourned.